You know how people say, behind every successful man is a woman? Well, in my case, it seems the woman was busy networking with her boss at the Marriott. What's worse is she called it strategic. Corporate America has its weird rules, but I didn't realize marital loyalty was optional when climbing the career ladder. Let me start from the beginning. I've changed all the names here for obvious reasons, but let's call my wife Madison. Madison and I had been married for 8 years. She was the type of person who always wanted more, a bigger house, a better car, a faster promotion. I admired her drive, but lately, it seemed like her ambition had started outpacing her morals. Madison worked as a senior marketing manager at a mid-sized company. She loved her job and often spoke glowingly about her boss, who we'll call Connor. Connor was apparently a marketing genius with a talent for bringing out the best in people. That's Madison's phrasing, by the way, not mine. At first, I thought her admiration for him was harmless. I mean, who doesn't respect a competent leader? But over the last few months, things started feeling off. Connor's name came up in almost every conversation, like he was some omnipresent figure in her life. If she wasn't gushing about his visionary leadership, she was quoting his latest advice about her career. It was Connor this, Connor that, until I started joking that she should get a cardboard cutout of him for her desk. She didn't laugh. The real turning point came one Friday evening. We were finishing dinner when Madison casually mentioned that Connor had hinted at her being in the running for a regional director position. It was her dream role, and I was genuinely happy for her. But then she followed it up with something I didn't see coming. Connor had suggested that she could solidify her standing by fostering a stronger personal connection with him. At the time, I didn't press her on what that meant. I figured it was just corporate doublespeak for networking or working extra hours. It wasn't until later that weekend, as she seemed unusually anxious and preoccupied, that she brought up Connor's suggestion in more detail. She said it with such confidence, like it was a perfectly normal conversation. Connor had proposed they spend one night together. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just a professional gesture to build trust and show her commitment to her role and the company's success. Yes, you read that right. She described sleeping with her boss as a professional gesture. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, a bizarre attempt at humor. But Madison's tone was dead serious. She framed it as an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to fast-track her career. And when I asked her how she expected me to feel about this strategic move, she looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. I'll spare you the details of my immediate reaction for now. Let's just say it was a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. But amidst all of that, a plan started forming in the back of my mind. Madison thought she could reduce our marriage to a business arrangement, so maybe it was time I handled things like a business, too. And that's how this story begins. I've always believed that when you're plotting revenge, you need to stay calm and focused. Emotions cloud judgment, and I wanted every piece of my plan to land perfectly. Everything was falling into place. Madison's strategic night was approaching, and I'd ensured she'd wake up to a life she wouldn't recognize. But then life threw me a curveball, because, of course, it couldn't be that simple. The day started as uneventful as you'd expect. Madison was busy running errands and getting a haircut, all part of her meticulous preparation. Meanwhile, I finalized my arrangements. The storage unit was ready, the damning emails were prepped, and the divorce lawyer had been briefed. I was counting down the hours until the grand reveal. Then, around mid-afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, which I almost ignored, but something told me to pick up. "Caleb?" the voice on the other end asked, hesitant but familiar. It was Laura, Connor's wife. I wasn't expecting to hear from her again so soon. After my email, I assumed she'd take care of her end and move on. But what she said next hit me like a punch to the gut. "I just got a message from Madison," she said, her voice tight. "She's been talking to Connor about leaving you and starting fresh. I don't know how much you knew, but this is more than one night." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Madison had been framing this as a single transaction, a one-time betrayal under the guise of ambition. But now it seemed like she was angling for something far more permanent. I thanked Laura and hung up, my mind racing. The carefully controlled rage I'd been managing suddenly boiled over. Madison hadn't just planned to cheat. She'd been laying the groundwork to leave me entirely. And here I was, naively thinking I could pull the rug out from under her before things escalated. Turns out, she was already a step ahead. I spent the next hour pacing the house, trying to figure out what this meant for my plan. Could I even go through with it? Was it worth it if she was already halfway out the door? As I tried to calm myself, a thought struck me. What if this wasn't just about revenge anymore? What if this was my chance to take control of the situation, not just to punish her, but to ensure I came out on top? I made a quick call to my lawyer, updating her on the new information. Her advice was simple: stay the course. If she's planning to leave, you need to make sure she has as little leverage as possible. By the time Madison came home that evening, everything felt different. I watched her move through the house, humming to herself as she packed her overnight bag, completely unaware that I knew the full extent of her betrayal. When she finally left, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt an eerie calm, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. But one thing was certain: this wasn't just about exposing her anymore. It was about reclaiming my life on my terms. When Madison left the house that evening, dressed like she was heading to a black-tie gala rather than a business meeting, I watched her car disappear down the street. The house was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I thought it would be satisfying to know she was walking right into her own downfall. But instead, a sense of unease began to creep in. This was the moment I'd been building toward for days. Her belongings were gone. The emails were sent. Her family had gone radio silent after I exposed her plans, and I was bracing for what I imagined would be a nuclear response from Connor's wife, Laura. Everything was perfectly aligned, yet something felt off. About an hour later, as I was reviewing my final steps, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but the text stopped me cold. If you care about how this ends, meet me at Riverview Cafe in 30 minutes. Don't tell anyone. No name, no context. Just a cryptic invitation. My first instinct was to ignore it. Probably a scam, right? But the timing was too coincidental. Who would reach out now, just as my plan was unfolding? Against my better judgment, I grabbed my jacket and keys. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where nobody would notice a hushed conversation. I walked in, scanning the room, and there she was, Laura. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion and fury, like someone who had spent years fighting a battle they didn't want to admit they were losing. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning to the seat across from her. I sat down, my pulse quickening. "What's this about?" She slid a manila envelope across the table. "Connor thinks he's untouchable. Madison does too. I need you to understand what you're really up against." Inside the envelope were photos, dozens of them. Connor with different women, each more incriminating than the last. There were financial statements, too, showing shady transactions between him and various unnamed accounts. It was damning, the kind of evidence that would ruin his career and reputation in an instant. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, even though I already knew. Laura's voice was calm, but sharp. "Connor has a pattern. He doesn't just have affairs. He isolates his targets. He promises them promotions, relationships, fresh starts, whatever they want to hear. But once he's done with them, he cuts them loose and destroys anyone in his way." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had been so focused on Madison's betrayal that I hadn't considered the bigger picture. Connor wasn't just another cheating boss. He was a manipulator, and Madison had fallen right into his trap. "And Madison?" I asked. "She's just another piece in his game," Laura said flatly. "He won't leave his wife. He won't actually help her career. He'll use her until she's no longer useful, and then he'll make sure she can't recover. He's done it before." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Everything I'd planned, the emails, the revenge, the storage unit, it all felt small compared to the mess I was now staring at. Madison wasn't just cheating on me. She was about to destroy her own life without even realizing it. Laura leaned in closer. "I'm not here to defend her. What she's doing to you is unforgivable. But if you want to walk away from this with more than just your pride intact, you need to think bigger. We take Connor down together." My mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. Teaming up with Laura meant escalating things far beyond a personal betrayal. It meant exposing Connor in a way that would ripple through Madison's life, my life, and probably a few boardrooms. I don't know, I said, my voice hesitant. Laura gave me a hard look. You're already in this, Caleb. The only question is how much you want to win. As I left the cafe, my thoughts were a storm of doubt and determination. Was I ready to escalate this? Was I ready to drag Madison and Connor into a scandal so big that neither of them could crawl out of it? By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to play it safe. Madison wanted a fresh start. Connor thought he was untouchable. Fine. They could have their moment, but I'd make sure it was one they'd never forget. When Madison left that evening, I should have felt victorious. This was the culmination of weeks of preparation, the perfect setup to dismantle the carefully curated image she'd built. Watching her leave in that sleek black dress, her smile brimming with excitement and nerves, felt surreal. I knew exactly where she was going, who she was meeting, and what she thought would happen next. The plan was in motion, every domino precariously aligned. But as her car disappeared down the street, an unexpected feeling crept in doubt. Not in my plan. It was airtight, but in the reality of what was about to unfold. Was I too calm? Too methodical? Or was I just starting to grasp how deeply her betrayal had cut? For all my planning, this moment felt less like triumph and more like the uneasy stillness before a storm. I sank into the couch, the emptiness of the house wrapping around me like a second skin. The silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, amplifying every thought, every doubt. My phone sat on the coffee table, a lifeline and a ticking time bomb all at once. I knew it was only a matter of hours before the fallout began, before emails would be read, phones would ring, and Madison's perfect little world would implode. The first buzz of my phone jolted me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with an unknown number, and for a split second, I hesitated. I wasn't in the mood for sales calls or wrong numbers. But something compelled me to answer, as if some unseen force knew I couldn't ignore this moment. Caleb. The voice was female, sharp but composed, and immediately familiar. It was Laura, Connor's wife. I'm glad you picked up, she continued. We need to talk. Her tone wasn't frantic or angry. It was measured, calculated, even. That alone made my pulse quicken. Laura wasn't the type to call without reason, and the fact that she was reaching out now, on the night of Madison's so-called big opportunity, told me something was wrong. What's going on? I asked, my voice betraying the tension creeping into my chest. I just got a message, she said, pausing for effect. From Madison. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Madison had messaged Laura? That didn't make sense. Why would she reach out to Connor's wife of all people? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. She's been talking to Connor, Laura continued, her words deliberate, like she was revealing a carefully guarded secret. They're not just planning tonight. They've been discussing leaving you and me together. The impact of her words was immediate, a gut punch that left me momentarily stunned. Madison hadn't just reduced our marriage to a stepping stone in her career. She was preparing to burn it to the ground entirely. And worse, she thought Connor, of all people, would be her escape route. I thought you should know, Laura added, her voice steady but tinged with something that sounded like pity. Because if they're serious, you're about to lose a lot more than just your pride. I barely managed to thank her before hanging up. The phone fell from my hand as I leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling like the answer to all of this might be written there. My carefully constructed plan suddenly felt fragile, like it was being threatened by a force I hadn't accounted for. Madison wasn't just betraying me. She was plotting to leave me entirely, and she'd roped Connor into it. For the next hour, I paced the house, replaying Laura's words over and over. How long had this been going on? Was Madison serious? Or was she just spinning fantasies to manipulate Connor? And what did Laura mean when she said I was about to lose more than my pride? The knot in my stomach tightened. Laura's call hadn't just introduced doubt. It had introduced stakes I hadn't anticipated. If Madison and Connor were scheming together, they could turn this entire situation against me. Suddenly, my controlled unraveling of her life felt precarious, as though I were teetering on the edge of a cliff without realizing it. I needed clarity, answers, something to ground me before the next move. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Laura. Meet me at Riverview Cafe in 30 minutes. You need to see what I've found. At this point, I wasn't sure if I was walking into an ambush or an opportunity. But sitting idly while Madison and Connor plotted wasn't an option. Grabbing my jacket, I headed for the door, my mind buzzing with questions and an unease that refused to subside. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in my life. Laura was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a manila envelope in front of her. She looked calm, but her eyes betrayed the same exhaustion I felt. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning for me to sit. The conversation that followed wasn't what I expected. Laura wasn't angry. She was methodical. She slid the envelope across the table, urging me to open it. Inside was an arsenal. Photos, financial records, and a timeline that documented Connor's long history of manipulation and betrayal. "He's not just having an affair with your wife," Laura explained, her voice sharp and unwavering. "This is what he does. He promises women the world, promotions, fresh starts, a way out. And when they've outlived their usefulness, he leaves them with nothing." Madison's just his latest target. It was like a fog lifting, revealing a landscape far uglier than I'd anticipated. I had been so focused on Madison's betrayal that I hadn't considered how deep the rabbit hole went. Connor wasn't just another cheating boss. He was a predator, and Madison had unknowingly walked straight into his web. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, still reeling from the weight of what I'd seen. "Because," Laura said, leaning in, "if you think this ends with one night at a hotel, you're wrong. Connor will destroy her. He'll destroy both of you, if it means saving himself. And I refuse to let that happen." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. She wasn't here to help Madison or to coddle me. She was here to end Connor, and she wanted me to join her. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. As I drove home that night, my mind was a storm of emotions. This wasn't the plan. Teaming up with Laura meant escalating everything, risking more than I ever intended. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was the only way to ensure Madison and Connor felt the full weight of their choices. The ground wasn't giving way beneath me. I was standing at the edge of the cliff, ready to push them both over. The night of reckoning had arrived. Madison thought she was walking into a gilded opportunity, a one-night strategic affair that would unlock doors to her dream promotion. Connor thought he was continuing his pattern of manipulation, pulling the strings of yet another unwitting woman to satisfy his ego. But they didn't realize they'd just stepped into a carefully orchestrated trap, a trap that had taken weeks of planning and the unexpected alliance of two betrayed spouses. It was almost poetic. The first domino fell late in the evening when the emails I had drafted earlier that week began hitting inboxes. Madison's family, her colleagues, Connor's co-workers, and even the company's board received a meticulously crafted message. In it were screenshots of Madison and Connor's flirty exchanges, the hotel reservation confirmation, and even an excerpt where Connor had laid out his just one-night suggestion. The subject line was simple: a betrayal you should know about. But the real piece to resistance was yet to come. Laura had promised me that the dossier on Connor, the one she'd so painstakingly compiled, would do more than just end his career. It would expose him as the fraud he was, taking down every shred of credibility he had built in the corporate world. She had contacts with key reporters, and by the time Madison and Connor were clinking champagne glasses in their hotel room, the first articles were already hitting the news cycle. Meanwhile, I had made my own preparations to ensure Madison's return would be unforgettable. The house was bare, her belongings locked away in a storage unit, every trace of her removed. I had even left a printed copy of the email on the kitchen counter, right where she'd be sure to see it. Above it, I taped a simple note: actions have consequences. But the unexpected twist? That came around midnight. As I sat at home, monitoring the fallout in real time, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the security camera I'd installed in the house. The motion alert showed the front door opening, but it wasn't Madison. It was Connor's wife, Laura. She stepped into the empty house, carrying a manila envelope under her arm. For a moment, I thought she'd gotten the addresses mixed up, but then I saw her glance at the email I'd left on the counter. She smirked, pulled out her phone, and took a picture of the scene. A second later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Laura. Thought I'd leave my own note. You'll thank me later. Confused but too intrigued to stop her, I watched as Laura scribbled something on the back of one of the documents and left it on the counter. She looked around the house one more time, then left as quietly as she'd come. The tension was unbearable. I wanted to rush over and see what she'd written, but something told me to wait. Madison deserved to read it first. The next morning, I woke to a barrage of notifications. The email had done its job. My inbox was filled with replies, some shocked, some sympathetic, and a few downright savage. Madison's family was in complete disarray. Her sister had even sent me a message apologizing on Madison's behalf, though she admitted she was disgusted by the whole thing. And Connor? The articles about his financial misdeeds and inappropriate behavior were everywhere. He was trending on social media, his reputation in shambles. Laura had sent me a link to a video of reporters ambushing him outside the hotel that morning, peppering him with questions about the allegations. His face was pale, his answers incoherent. It was the first time he'd looked powerless, and I reveled in it. But the highlight of my day came when Madison finally returned home. She walked through the door looking disheveled, her overnight bag slung over one shoulder. I could see the confusion in her eyes as she took in the empty house, the absence of her belongings, and the stark cleanliness of the space we'd once shared. Then her gaze landed on the email on the counter. Her face drained of color as she read it, her eyes darting to the stack of divorce papers I'd placed next to it for good measure. But it wasn't until she saw Laura's note that the full weight of the situation hit her. I had waited long enough. I stepped into the room just as she was reading the note. Her head snapped up, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "What is this?" She finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling. "It's your new reality," I said, my tone as cold as I could muster. "You wanted a fresh start, Madison. Congratulations, you've got one." She crumpled into the chair, the note from Laura still clutched in her hand. I could see her lips moving as she read it again, over and over, trying to process the words. Later, I found out what it said. "Dear Madison, Connor destroys everything he touches. Welcome to the club. Laura." I didn't wait for her to respond. I handed her a folder containing the details of her belongings in the storage unit, the new garage code to retrieve them, and a pointed reminder that any further communication would go through my lawyer. Then I left her sitting there, the life she'd so meticulously curated crumbling around her. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was immense. Madison's company fired her after discovering she'd violated several ethical guidelines. Connor was forced to resign amid the scandal, and his attempts to spin the narrative only made things worse. He and Madison didn't last long after that. Whatever fleeting fantasy they'd built collapsed under the weight of their mutual self-interest. As for Laura and me, we didn't stay in touch. Our alliance was temporary, born out of mutual betrayal and a shared desire for justice. But I'll always remember her final words to me before we parted ways. "Some people play checkers, others play chess. Always play the long game, Caleb." She was right. Revenge isn't about quick wins. It's about patience, precision, and letting your enemies destroy themselves. And as I stood in my new apartment weeks later, looking out over a city that felt full of possibility, I finally felt free. Madison tried to contact me a few times. Apologies, pleas for closure, even a half-hearted attempt to start over. I ignored every message. Some things aren't worth revisiting. As for me, I'm not in a rush to rebuild. For now, I'm just enjoying the peace of knowing that I came out of this stronger, smarter, and with a damn good story to tell.